I am John Hampton.
And I'm Lillian O'Brien Davis, and we're the curators of Conceptions of White, an exhibition that offers context and nuanced perspectives to help grapple with contemporary configurations of white identity.
The show moves through historical works that examine the foundations and origins of whiteness into contemporary artists that grapple with how these acts of racialization have manifested in acts of white supremacy, guilt, and benevolence. The exhibition opens with Robert Morse's iconic minimalist sculpture, Portal. Made in 1964, it acts as the entry point for Conceptions of White and acknowledges the exhibition's exploration of whiteness is firmly situated within the context of the white cube, which is what contemporary art galleries are known as. Portal follows the minimalist principle of reducing sculpture to its most essential elements. The implied door frame is both familiar and alien, while referencing architectural standards and presumptions of a standard body. Apollo Belvedere is one of the most revered sculptures in the Western art canon, and it's played an important role in the development of white origin myths. Johann Winckelmann, known as the father of art history, first encountered the white marble sculpture in the Vatican, and he celebrated it as the highest ideal of art, and as the finest representation of human beauty and spirit. Winckelmann, unaware of the likelihood that it was painted, equated the Greco-Roman sculpture's whiteness with white skin. The discipline of art history helped spread and naturalize these neoclassical ideals of a superior white race, which came to be the core of the Western concept of civilization.
New York-based artist Fred Wilson is known for creating meaning by bringing various objects into proximity to each other, often challenging dominant narratives by reconfiguring them through an African-American lens. Love and Loss in the Milky Way features an arrangement of ceramics, milk glass, and found sculptures collected by the artist. The arrangement suggests connections and provokes audiences to question their assumptions and social conditioning and teachings. A broken Greco-Roman male bust lies in close proximity to a bust of a young African woman, under the watchful eyes of Hebe, the cupbearer and goddess of youth. The milk glass, Grecian replicas, cookie jar, and title assemble in a milky, white, and jet black constellation that suggests differing modes of agency, consumption, and relation.
Greek Slave is widely considered one of the first great pieces of American art and presents a telling portrait of the racial dynamics at play during the early formation of American identity. The piece takes a neoclassical approach that draws from Greco-Roman traditions to depict a woman who's been taken into slavery during the Greek War of Independence. The piece references obsession with the history of white slavery and the creation of white identity that can be seen in the tradition of the odalisque painting, where we get the term Caucasian, and it also helps give us a window into the complex identity formation in early America, when this work became an important source of inspiration within social justice movements that still reinforced narratives of white superiority and moral authority.
Los Angeles-based artist Ken Gonzalez Day's Erased Lynching series was created by photographing lynching postcards, which were popular souvenirs within the United States during the early 20th century, and digitally removing the victims. This particular image depicts a lynching of two white men, John Holmes and Thomas Thurmond. The event was well documented as it was a relative anomaly due to their race and the late date of their lynching. The people in the audience may not be actively tying a noose, but they are participants nonetheless, and their mere presence and inaction creates an atmosphere within which such violence is normalized and perpetuated. Gonzalez Day brings the conflicted nature of white identity into focus as a category in constant flux, expanding and contracting its own perimeters at the will of the most powerful, the tacit consent of the crowd, and the arbitrary parameters for whiteness, including its internal hierarchies.
In White Man's Burden, Montreal-based artist Deanna Bowen assembles historical and archival materials to reveal the relationships between the founders of the three institutions hosting this exhibition and the cultural context in which they worked, including white supremacist ideologies and organizations, as well as the cultural founders in the first half of the 20th century. Bowen's work maps the tight network of actors who established the blueprint for Canadian culture, a blueprint that continues to influence our institutions, policies, and national identity in order to examine the context in which this exhibition is held. Bowen invites viewers to make their own way through these relationships, as the close-knit nature of Canada's cultural elite allows for continual revelations and shifting understandings of the mythologies that uphold the idea of Canada that many take for granted today. This image reproduces one iteration of an evolving installation from a Wallen Nell painter's studio at MacDowell Artist Residency. Painter had been reflecting on her 2010 book, The History of White People, which heavily influenced this exhibition. She adapted it for the era of Trump and looked at how white nationalists had co-opted Greco-Roman identity, and she started to question, were the ancients white, using this idea of ancient hair, looking at the hair of the ancients and saying, are these really people that we would identify as white? And the resulting installation is presented here.
Saskatchewan-based artist Barbara Benneely's project explores the term white land, a legal term used by developers to delineate land that is not slated for development. For this project, Benneely traveled the perimeter of Treaty 4 as it is mapped to explore how treaty is understood by settlers and institutions who exist within its perimeter. Benneely's project plays with the language of white land, exploring how white people are often sheltered by colonial institutions, where Indigenous people are forced towards whiteness through attempts at forced assimilation, education, and displacement from the land.
Jennifer Chan's Aryan recognition tool is a facial recognition software that superficially determines how Aryan you are. The tool is machine learning trained on the faces of senior officers in the Third Reich, and then it uses the webcam, takes a picture of you and outputs a percentage reading of how Aryan you are, how close you are to any of these individual officers. The tool really plays with the West's obsession with visual difference, of both from racial classification, but also to the types of playful tools that we see in augmented reality tools like Snapchat today. And it shows also how the technologies or the race science of the time of doing facial classifications has influenced the technologies of today that aren't even consciously trying to reproduce these belief systems, but then are building off of the tools that we've inherited.
The term free white and 21 originated in 1828 and referred to people who should have the right to vote. The film, Free White and 21, is an account of everyday racism experienced by the artist, Howardina Pindell. Pindell was born in 1943 and was 21 when the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. This was a period of flux in the United States at the end of the Second World War, as Americans sought to differentiate themselves as a nation unified through diversity. The film explores the subtleties of white power through everyday interactions wherein those protected under its mantle are unable to see outside of their own experience.
Speak White is a powerful poem by Michel Lalande written in 1970. The title refers to a demand spoken by overseers on American plantations and then subsequently adopted by Anglo-nationalists against French Canadians. It reveals white identity's requirement for assimilation by telling French Canadians that they're not fully white if they don't abandon their cultural specificity and language and join the dominant colonial identity. Lalande did not intend this piece to champion Quebec nationalism, but instead to look at the experience of Quebecers within larger projects of imperialism.
Los Angeles-based artist Arthur Jafa's film, The White Album, reflects the current state of racial identity in America through a collage of found and original video. The film explores white identity with moments of joy, love, and beauty butting up against scenes that depict fear, hatred, and anger. The artist captures scenes with his gallerist, which depict tender moments of trust between an artist and his advisor, contrasted against heart-wrenching scenes such as when a black police officer must stand impassively as the white man she has just arrested contemptuously shouts racial slurs at her. Jafa's snapshot of contemporary white identity is painful, honest, delicate, and brutal. It presents a complex picture of a category of identity that generally eludes a direct gaze, yet is right in the open, ready to be seen.
White Noise American Prayer Rug by Tlingit and Unungkik artist Nicholas Galanin refers to the steady droning static of an uncalibrated TV or the white noise that puts us to sleep when we're too distracted by the chaos of contemporary life. It also references the noise spewed by media pundits of the news cycle of all of the material that we're inundated in Western society today, and speaks to the chaos of contemporary white identity that is always shifting and becomes so much more than complexion as we try to navigate the increasing complexity of our lives.
File a Primer is a keynote presentation about file management protocols that act as an allegory for larger systems of classification, standards, and control. The presentation sells the concept of a neutral, blank, white file that can overcome blackout and disorder. The animations become increasingly chaotic as the file struggles to maintain order, eventually looping back to the original blank file. File is a system designed to replicate and self-preserve, absorbing or rejecting whatever does not reinforce its understanding of truth and order.
Toronto-based artist Jeremy Bailey's work offers tongue-in-cheek parodies of technological attempts to solve complex social problems. The artist's persona inhabits the awkward space between the white savior, ally, and opportunist. Bailey devised their speculative company using the design language of tech startups. White Simple offers software as a service that claims to improve race relations while capitalizing on the momentum built by Black, Indigenous, and people of color activists. The resulting software addresses progressive white audiences as a potential market segment. It strives to disrupt anxiety about their white privilege by offering surface-level changes that still leave underlying structures intact. These artists help us examine the ideology of cultural erasure embedded in the social construction of whiteness, the ramifications of its continually expanding borders, and the society fostered through this relatively young theory of racial categorization.
Their work helps us examine the many complex dimensions of engaging in classifications of whiteness, drawing on connections between colonial whiteness and the meaning we ascribe to the color white.
Thank you for joining us, and look again.